Awesome. It's such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Joy to be with you.
Yeah. You know, you were born in Texas, and on your mom's side, you're Scottish and English, and on your dad's side, you're Mexican-American. I wonder if you can talk about what it was like to grow up in a setting like that.
Sure. So growing up in Texas, Rios is kind of like Smith. And so I kind of just assumed that,
it's like young.
Yeah, really, right? It was very, and back in the day, that was the days in which you went through the phone book and you could actually see everyone, right? I mean, that's dating myself a little bit, but that was a fun exercise in Texas. But my father's parents were in the Air Force, and so his existence was moving to every single state. He was actually born in Japan, and so it was really important for my mom's family is from northern Louisiana, and it was really important for both of my parents to have equal value in terms of the cultural kind of mix that was our family, our nuclear family. And so I spent a lot of time going, and my grandparents retired to San Antonio where the majority of their brothers and sisters were. And I would say one of the things that was interesting about that I've spent years processing later on is my grandparents were really heavy, on my father's side, were really heavy assimilationists.
Oh, yeah.
So they wanted only English only in the household, and so my father or his brothers didn't really speak Spanish, but they understood pretty well because the larger family was always Spanglish.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you can chart other families who kind of make decisions like that, and there were some benefits that came from that. I mean, I was an English major at Davidson because,
you just take it for granted.
Right.
You just do what sounds right, and that's the grammatical
But there was a lot of cultural history that was kind of cut off, including their own knowledge. Luckily, was able to speak with them before they died in Spanish, and that really was a healing kind of moment. But I remember Thanksgiving Day gathering in San Antonio with my father and his brothers and our families, which is relatively smaller, and kind of going through what I would say is a typical American Thanksgiving experience. And then on Friday, instead of, this is pre-Black Friday kind of push for shopping extravaganza, we used to gather the whole family together, which was much bigger. And so all my cousins and aunts and uncles, and that was such a joyful experience. We would sit around the table and play different games and talk about what we were going to do. The adults would always talk about the fun things that they were going to do with the kids in Spanish. And so I learned that if I wanted to follow along for the fun stuff, I had to learn Spanish. So I took it upon, I'm an only child, and so I took it upon myself as an important generational thing to at least learn Spanish as a second language, even if it wasn't my first.
So what was that like, studying Spanish? And did you start doing it when you're in middle school or when you're in college, or when did you start taking Spanish seriously?
That's a good question. Well, I would say I've got tapes. Cassette tapes that my mom, she recorded, and I heard her teaching me Spanish. And so one of the things that I most value about that now is that here's my mother whose family is now bigger because of marriage, right, culturally. Yeah. And she chose, even in her broken Spanish, to try to make sure that I was learning Spanish as a way of validating the two sides of our family. It was really a beautiful sacrificial gift. So I knew that Spanish was important even beyond just, hey, we're going to go get ice cream or we're going to go to Six Flags. But I would say in high school, I took classes, of course, like, second
high school language classes, yeah.
And we took a trip. My Spanish teachers offered a trip to go to Spain. I was in Wisconsin at the time. That's where I went to high school. And my Spanish teacher said, yeah, we're taking a trip to Spain. And so we went around to different parts of Spain. And that was the first time I realized what a value it would be to speak Spanish and not just be able to kind of follow along in the books for that kind of learning. So I kind of made a commitment to myself at that point that if I got a chance to study abroad, I would study abroad in a Spanish-speaking country, ideally Spain. I did. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure I would push myself through those baby steps that you have to take to learn a language and mess up. And my Spanish, like grammatically, there are things that, I don't sound like an educated, person, right? But that's not really what matters.
That's who your daughter told me that.
Yeah, I'm sure she did. Well, it's even worse. It's even worse in Italian. Yeah, her Italian compared to mine, the gap is like this. So.
Amelia is basically living in Mexico. She's been there for a month and a half. Our daughter, and the purpose is to really have Spanish completely dialed in. And I wonder if there's certain, like she says, there's almost kind of like a personality tendency she has in Spanish and personality tendency she has in English. And
Totally
I wonder
true.
if you'd experienced anything like
Absolutely,
that. Absolutely,
100%. It's weird, because some of it has to do with confidence level, right? If you speak in your dominant language, you're not processing anything. You're not like trying to translate on the go. And in at least early stages of most second and third languages, you're trying to imagine what it is like in your dominant language.
Right.
But there's a point in which you get past that, in which it just starts to flow. But yeah, I definitely have different personalities. In languages, and I come across differently, which is why that time to speak with my grandparents before they died was so important, because I saw them in a way in which I had never seen them before.
Yeah, right.
Again, military assimilation. My grandfather was a major in the Air Force, and I think he got passed over. He believed he was passed over multiple times just because of his last name and his cultural heritage. And it was awesome to hear them talk about, what that time in the Pacific was like when my dad was born, and just experience a different part of their personalities.
Yeah, for
sure. I
sure.
have that too, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have any advice for people who are like learning new languages? Like what worked for you in terms? Because I can imagine going to Rome. That must have been a revolution, and
Totally.
and you were fully mature adult when you undertook that.
I think the most important thing is to remember that communication is way beyond words, and that if you want to connect with someone else, there's a way in which you can kind of orient your heart towards that person that will allow that to happen regardless of your facility with language. And I would also say you can't be afraid to sound like a baby.
Yeah, right.
That's the thing that most adults have the hardest time with, is that you forget that when we learned to speak whatever our dominant language was, it was in little bits at a time. It was, baby talk and stuff. And that's what you have in your second language. But most people don't want to, they feel ashamed, or they feel like that's not going to be reflective of who they are. And you just kind of have to go through that stage and be willing to be corrected and to make mistakes. And if you do that, then you can kind of come out on the other side and eventually get better.
I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about you so far. Just, we've been friends for such a short time, but there is like a unself-consciousness that you have, and a kind of a boldness and a lack of fear and a kind of an openness to make mistakes when you're speaking and doing the liturgy, and there's hundreds, maybe even 1,000 people in the room. You're still bold enough to not, let that rattle you, and to just like be yourself, which is a little bit more of a baby in those other languages.
Totally. Yeah, it's important. Beginner's mind, right? That's one of the things that's really important to remember. I actually think that Jesus' whole statement about you have to be like a child enter the kingdom of heaven is tied in with this a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. You and I had a chance to talk about sports things. I wonder if you can talk about a memory that you remember of sports, and then just like how you think athletics, having been a part of that, has had an ongoing positive effect on how you do things today. Beginner mind was a great part of that too.
So my primary sport, I ran cross country, I played basketball, but baseball was my real kind of passion sport. And one of the things I loved most about baseball was the fact that, while I could practice batting in the cages alone, and I worked for an indoor batting cage in Wisconsin to kind of improve my game, you can't play baseball alone. It requires a team. And so therefore, if you're going to be able to be successful as a team, you have to make sure you have proper team dynamics and make sure that everyone's pulling in the same direction and using their best skills to make the whole better. And I remember I was captain of our baseball team, and one of the things that I would do in the dugout before after we'd warm up and everything, before the game started and the first pitch was thrown, I would read these little quotes from as a Golden State Warriors fan, it's hard to say this, but Pat Riley's book,
Oh, yeah.
The Winner Within, and it had in the margins little quotes that were inspirational to him and that he was sharing. And so I would read some of those quotes each time before the game as a way of just saying, remember that we're bigger, and this unit of a team is bigger than our individual gifts. And at the same time, each of us have to individually do what we are called to do to make this team work. And we had pretty good success. We punched above our weight, I would say, during that time. In fact, some of the best memories were just seeing us kind of beat teams that were much talent-wise better than us because we had that cohesion. In fact, the greatest joy this year is that the shortstop from that team and I, we practiced all the time. I mean, after practice, we would stay there and just turn to over and over again. And we broke a conference record for most double plays in a season and everything. But he is now the coach of that high school team, and for the first time, we won state.
Wow.
And I can't even tell you the joy that I felt, right? Because here's Bobby and I, we went through the highs and lows of almost being there, but just kind of getting thwarted by the eventual state champion every time. And so you also have to learn how to lose, right? You have to learn what it means to not reach your goal and still realize that team dynamic that's what endures, right? And so celebrating with him that win this year, I saw all of our teammates just come out because we were just so happy for him and so happy for the team.
The program, exactly.
That was a validation that the kind of teamwork that we had done was really worthwhile.
Yeah, it's funny, as you were talking, so many memories. Every time I talk to you in these kinds of settings, it just brings up so many memories of, I'd forgotten, I was the team captain for the rugby team. And one of the hardest things for me was working with guys who just didn't have the skills. But as the captain, I needed to bring them along, especially because if they did the wrong thing, they just get flattened.
That's right.
So how did you help people who are, kind of, as team captain with your baseball teammates?
Well, we had I would say most of the folks on our team had a pretty semi-equal skill set. I mean, some were better than others, of course, as it goes, but it really was more about, the dynamic of, do you include this person as a constituent member of the team regardless of their skill set?
Yeah.
Or is there a smaller subset of, this is the real team, and then everyone else is just kind of playing along? And so a lot of that work was about saying, okay, so right fielder, you are just as important as shortstop. You're just as important as there's no role on that team that is more important than others, because if you don't function as a unit, you don't function. And so I feel like a lot of that work was, we practiced really hard. We worked on skill sets and situations. In fact, one of my memories was practicing in April and there being snow coming down in Wisconsin.
Gosh, of course.
Never would have seen this in Texas and Louisiana.
Oh my gosh.
But I couldn't figure out what was a ball and what was a flake.
Right, completely. That's how you got hit in the head.
Right, exactly. So, but I would say bringing those people along so that they understood their value and really claimed it was important. And so it was, it's subtle, but there was a lot of emotional work that was necessary to get to that stage.
Yeah, Heidi's teaches at USF Law School, my wife, and she says that the athletes are able to take coaching better. So criticism. So you have like English majors who are in there and they're like writing beautiful prose, but will not be corrected. No, this is so much more. But those athletes, they're used to saying, hey, if you lift your left arm up, you're going to have more leverage, and then you're going to be able to hit the ball faster or whatever.
Yeah. All of us want to put our best best foot forward, and no one likes to be embarrassed. That's one of the things that's really, blame and shame are hard for humans to deal with.
For sure.
However, if you can get to the point in which you are part of an ensemble, I've experienced this in theater as well, right? Where if you let go of that stuff so that the larger work can shine through, then that's where the joy of life is. it forges connections with other people. You realize that, you can make mistakes and still be loved and accepted. I mean, there were times in which someone dropped the ball, or like, someone struck out or something like that. They didn't stop being a member of the team. And in fact, it was more important than ever to reassure them that they were, and that, we're going to do it next time. And that was a better way of going, as opposed to berating them and making them feel horrible, and then kind of keeping their skills down.
Yeah, I thought of when you were installed on May 4th, and your choir director came, and we did that music that was so beautiful. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just your experience in music and in singing and choir, and what you've learned and how that affects you, your experience of the liturgy and worship.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've been a music lover my whole life. Again, thanks, Mom. Singing to me, and my dad is the same way. My dad, actually, we used to host bands that would come into the town of Monroe, Louisiana, and so I was really close to music earlier on, and at least in the kind of rock and roll sense. But growing up in the church, I've gained a great appreciation, obviously, for our hymns, and also our way of singing in ensemble. I mean, again, choir is not too different from a baseball team, from a rugby team. Even if the activity is different, that cohesion is very much essential to be able to do your best. And I love the fact that, I mean, I pursued in high school and then also in college a lot of theater, and musical theater particularly was something that I loved. So I've got to play some really cool roles, got to work with some really amazing people, and thought that was what I was going to do for a long time. Either that, or I moved to Austin, Texas, to establish a year of residency. I thought to go to law school, but it ended up being seminary. But during that year, I played music on 6th Street. Made some money. Cool. Worked a courier job just to kind of pay the other bills. And
that's great. So you were a busker. You played the guitar.
Yeah, totally.
Oh man, that's been my life dream.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I started it when I studied abroad in San Sebastian in Spain. I took my guitar that my uncles had given me not too long before that, and I just took it to play, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we do it for like Salvation Army bell ringing. I bring the ukulele. We sing Hawaiian songs.
I'll tell you
the
what.
The kids were like this tall.
If you're out on the street playing, and you really kind of experience what it's like to have people walk by and sometimes pay attention, sometimes not, you get to a place in which you find out how much you actually love music. Because, is it about the response from people, or is it about the music?
Right.
And that was an important learning for me. But it's funny because, of course, in seminary, we had liturgy classes, and particularly chanting the Eucharist and things like that. And because of that training, I had some facility with that. And I've thought over the years how interesting it is that I thought I was being trained up for one direction, but it turns out that training is being used in this particular
you are
way,
a professional musician now. So here's what happened. So you're getting up, we hadn't ever heard you do anything yet. And one of the choirmen afterwards, right after the service, said, "Yeah, we were holding our breath." And then you sang, and they're like, "Oh, yes." I always loved that. So yeah, you're kind of a professional musician. Now, Alan Jones was an amazing actor and did recordings of like A Christmas Carol, like professional recordings, and was always in different plays. That's my biggest regret growing up, that I've never been.
There's still time.
I know. So I was thinking maybe we could get the clergy of the diocese there.
I'm for it.
Put together a play or something.
Oh, I'm for it. I mean, we're already talking karaoke nights, so I'm up for that. I think there's a lot of joy in that.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. So this week we had clergy retreat, and it was great to see everybody, and I think everybody really enjoyed getting to know you. And it was a beautiful occasion. But in passing, one time you mentioned that that Karate Kid was a movie that you'd seen when you were a kid. I wonder what other books and movies you saw as a child that kind of are still with you, that you still kind of go back to.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of the kind of English literature classics that were part of my life growing up, you know. I mean, I remember reading Treasure Island and, you know, all of, you know, living in those worlds, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the Never-Ending Story came out when I was relatively young.
Right.
And so that idea that books could hold these vast worlds was really important to me, and I loved books. But I think what's worth sharing here that kind of altered my life in a way that was maybe not as obvious is I went to church one Sunday, and one of the older kids for me, I mean for my parents, I mean he was probably a teenager, and I was like probably 5 or 6 or something like that, had a whole group of books that he was going to give away. And so he said, if you want these, you can have them. And of course, I leapt upon it because I thought that would be really exciting. They were Choose Your Own Adventures. Oh, wow. And so, like, he gave me like 80 Choose Your Own Adventures. Oh my gosh! Like to this day, like one of the things I'm going to do is like I'm going to go look at the ones that I don't have and see if I can find them. Like,
yeah, right, exactly.
And just because it turns out that idea that your decisions matter was really formative to me. You know, of course, like I tried to figure out ways to, you know, get to the best ending as often as I could. But what I've gone back and read those as an adult and just enjoyed kind of seeing where the choices lead, regardless
and for those
of whether
people who
it's the best.
are slightly older than us, because I think if you're 10 years older than us, you may not. So they're a book, and you read the page and it says, you go to the mountains. If you want to go to the mountains, you go to page 20. If you want to go to the river, you go to page 24. And so each different time you go through, it's a different path you choose through the book.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. 80 of them.
80 of them. Yeah, it's so much fun. And so, like, you know, when Asia was, my daughter was, you know, just born, that was one of the things that we would read together. And, you know, they're a little dated in some of their language. And, of course, you know, we've grown a little bit as people to know how to refer to certain things.
Right, of course.
But some of the authors were really, really good at making sure that you could see that choices matter and that they would really lead you in different directions depending on how you would, you know, choose them.
So true. So a few times you've mentioned church camps just in different conversations I have. And I was wondering if you could just share a memory of church camp, or maybe even just talk about what church camps meant to you.
Sure. So when I was in Louisiana and younger, I went to Camp Hartner, which was the camp of the Diocese of Western Louisiana. And so I went as a camper, young. I mean, I think traditional camp experience, you know, I showed up in the car, and my mom said she had to roll down the windows because I was, you know, hadn't showered or bathed during the whole week. You know, I was like, you know, 6, 7 year old, you know, kind of just loving being at camp. But when I was in high school in Wisconsin, we had a camp there as well that I participated in. But I would say the camp that most formed me was actually the camp in Western North Carolina, which is, I haven't heard any reports yet on how our camp is doing.
Right, because of the hurricane.
I just talked to my parents this morning for the first time. They're okay, which is great, but a lot of people are in deep trouble right now. But the camp, Camp Henry is the name of the camp, and it's out at Lake Logan, which is this beautiful freshwater lake fed by a mountain stream in the middle of a gorgeous valley in Western North Carolina. And so I came there as assistant director while I was in seminary. Oh. The director at the time was at the church where my parents attended, and he asked me if I would be assistant director, and I said yes. And that experience with Camp Henry changed my life because it was the beginning. I was in seminary when I was there, so it was seeing the practical things we were learning about put into play. The first summer was a particularly important summer because camp had moved from where it had always been, which was not very far from my parents' house, to this place that's gorgeous, but also kind of foreign. Yeah. And we had to figure out a way to take all of the memories that were from that first period and make sure that they informed the new life. Yeah. And so I remember one of the things that we did was they had an ark. Actually an Ark of the Covenant out of wood. Oh my gosh! Yes, and so there were like documents and pictures and things like that were from the a previous setting in there, and we actually did a liturgical kind of procession around the whole property with that, and helped everyone kind of root into the new place so that it's okay to make new memories here, and it's okay to value these older memories that we have. And I was assistant director there. I was eventually a chaplain there. And one of the great joys of life is, I served for this year in Mexico as a young adult service corps missionary. And several of the counselors who were part of that camp world went on to actually serve as young adult service corps people around the globe. And many have chosen careers in the church, lay or ordained. And it's a beautiful thing to see how that love, that unconditional love, and that sense of community has actually helped spread out to those who maybe don't have those things.
Yeah, it's cool to think of this fellowship of people who shared that experience and created those rituals and honored the past rituals, and how that life continues on.
We have a fantasy football league too that we play.
Great. I love it.
which is still kind of fun to.
It's good to have that one connection.
That's right, to connect with people.
That's great. So, so you're busking on the streets in Austin, which I love that picture.
That's super fun.
So then you go to seminary. What was your favorite class in seminary? What, who did you meet there? What was it like?
Well, I was very fortunate that our class had a high percentage of, at the time, younger folks who were in the process.
That's a really good point.
And the class before and the class after did not have as many younger folks.
Yeah.
And so there was a natural affinity for those of us who were going to do this as our first career as opposed to second or third. We developed some really strong bonds. And I would say without my clergy cohort, we call ourselves Team Seminary because we were formed there, but we talk every day by WhatsApp, and we talk every Thursday for 30 minutes, and then we get together once a year for a retreat. And they were all here on May 4th, in support, but without them, and we served in different parts of the church, different context, but we've shared that life and been able to be really honest about each other. And I mean, that was the greatest gift that came out of seminary, is just the friendships there.
Yeah, the lasting friendships.
I really loved our Bible classes because we had 3 different teachers who kind of focused on the text. We had a kind of
Cynthia was there, right?
Yeah, Cynthia was.
Because I've known her for 30 years.
Yeah, so Cynthia was originally my New Testament teacher, and then
great.
Eventually my advisor, and now just retired as the dean.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite people in the church.
Yeah.
She's just such a great mind.
So those classes were great. We had a curriculum that was different than any other class, which was called Symposium. And one of the nice things is that it didn't last, but it worked really well for us, there was a topic for each year that we would approach through all of our classes. So like a grand topic.
Like missionary work,
yeah,
or
exactly.
like the Trinity.
And so we would view that through church history. We would view that through Bible. We'd view that through liturgy or pastoral care. And that was really a joy.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. And then were there particular theologians or ethicists or biblical scholars that you particularly gravitate toward?
Yeah, we had a whole kind of the survey in our theology class, but I really liked a theologian called Hans Urs von Balthasar.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because he had this whole series on kind of reading the passion and also Jesus's life through a thing called theodrama.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that matched up really well with my theater leanings at the time. And in fact, one of the things that I'd like to do in my later years is a more fulsome study of his theology, along with a couple of other folks who are outside the Christian tradition but who are interested in, Mikhail Bakhtin and Augusto Boal. I did some theater training in Montreal with Augusto Boal's method of forum theater, which I actually think could maybe be a way in which we do sermons that are generated from people as opposed to just generated from us. That's a kind of long-term goal that I have. I would love to see that come out. And Mikhail Bakhtin's idea of the novel or the epic, and seeing how Jesus' story is really about undercutting the epic story and looking in the novel story. I wanted to kind of weave those 3 together into some kind of a dissertation, but
Yeah.
life got
Well,
in
it
the way.
still might be, it's still a possibility. Donald Shell, who preached here during the summer, who, is a friend of ours, he does that. So he'll teach everyone how to, so, okay, so you're the woman at the well, and you're Jesus in this, and you're the townspeople, and how do you think you'd feel? And, so as a like a liturgical practice, so in the middle of a church service.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in a cathedral, but it's great in a small church.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw that at play in Montreal, which was fascinating because the idea is that you generate a problem that's larger than just your personal one. That's something that's a societal problem, and you figure out a way to work on it as a group. And so you create a skit and you sit up on stage and you try to act it out. And then when you kind of run into a solution that feels like it's a magical solution, like that wouldn't work in real life, there's a person who kind of mediates between the two, both the stage world and the spectator world, to try to make sure that instead of spectators, you encourage people to be spect-actors. So if, for instance, if like Valerie, you said, well, I don't know if that would really work like that, I would say, well, we come on up and try it out. And so then you would come up and then you would replace the actor there and try out your solution, and then it would develop this amazing organic kind of way of presentation. And sometimes the images that were presented, like for instance, I remember to this day, we were talking about healthcare, and particularly about immigrants trying to get healthcare in the Canadian system because it was in Montreal. And there was a woman who was seated behind an imaginary box, in a booth, and she was like, "Sir, could you please speak into the
microphone?"
Right there. And so the guy would come up and he would go, "Yes, I'm trying to get health care like this." And then she was like, "Sir, could you please speak into it?" "Yes, I'm trying to get it." "Yeah, sir, could you please?" And he's like, he contort himself down here, and like, it really made you see like how much you're asked to bend over backwards to try to access this care. And so then we were able to kind of workshop some ways around that. I found that fascinating because I think that the church needs to be about not only proclaiming our truth, but about helping people gain the energy, the courage to actually put faith into practice in the public square. And so that was one way in which I saw that possible.
Yeah, like that dynamic, there's something, it's almost mystical or mysterious just about how we relate to each other, how we connect with one another, that you can study through drama. Yeah, that's neat. So you moved to North Carolina, and you're the canon for Spanish language ministries, and then you were also the rector of a Spanish-speaking church. Was that the first church that you were a rector of?
Yes.
Yeah. So how was that? It's just hard to learn how to be a rector in the church that's exactly like every other church in the diocese, but being in a more unique church, it must have been even more of a challenge.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've got a really good buddy, again, part of this Camp Henry crew, who was also a young adult service corps member who has just started being a rector. And all these years, we've worked together in different contexts, and he's observed, he's like, I think being a rector is hard. And then he's been in it for a month now. He's like, being a rector is hard. It's like, yep. I think the big change, I was a curate for 2.5 years at a really nice church in North Asheville, Grace Episcopal Church. Lovely community formed in that environment. So thankful for Gary Coffey, who was the rector at the time. He was so kind to me and a really good mentor. But I remember starting as rector, and I think the challenge is that you just feel like there's, it's so much is on you.
Yeah.
And I think that the growth for me during that time, because I still had this diocesan role, which was about connecting different churches and people in churches to make sure that our larger capacity was expanded. But I still had this very localized ministry of how to make sure that this particular congregation is thriving. I think the challenge was figuring out that you just can't do it by yourself. If you try to go it alone, you're going to fail. And so I had to rely and trust in the vestry. I had to rely and trust in different diocesan people who were willing to lend a hand to try to make this happen. And part times, you have to be willing to be disappointed, and things don't work out and people aren't able to take care of what they want.
That's the tough thing in that setting. You can either do it all yourself and it's perfect, or you involve other people and it's not perfect anymore.
That's right.
But other people believe in it,
Yeah, it's God's perfect, but not Austin's perfect.
Right. Exactly. That's totally right.
Yeah. So, but that's true. Like you get but the gift of that is that, I mean, we couldn't have done it by ourselves anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole mystery and beauty of church, is that it's not about any one of us individually succeeding. It's about all of us going to where God's calling us.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I wonder about is maybe you can talk a little bit about those, those people you were serving, both as the canon
Sure.
in the diocese and in your own church. Just, what was life like for those Spanish-speaking people who were, in your world?
Yeah. On the edge in most cases. I mean, I would say 90% of our community was undocumented. A good portion, farm workers or service workers.
Yeah.
And early on, it was very clear to me that the church was placed in a county that was particularly antagonistic towards folks who went to our church. And so I felt that I was scared. As I said earlier, Spanish wasn't my first language. Yeah. And so I had studied in Spain. I had lived for a year in Mexico, so I had some facility with language that I didn't have when I was growing up. But I was really concerned about trying to do ministry in my second language. How was I going to be a priest who heard confessions? How was I going to be a priest who could really offer good counsel? Yeah. And what I learned was that by rooting myself in the Bible and being able to take our lectionary readings and put them into conversation each Sunday, that was enough. That I felt supported by God, even when I wasn't able to speak better than a baby, because it wasn't about that. It was about actually the fact that we're accompanying each other through some really difficult stuff. And I mean, one of the hardest things that we had to deal with was our senior warden got deported, which I remember how much we wrote an article at the time, said Carlos may be the first senior warden in the history of the Episcopal Church to be deported.
Exactly.
And that was a harrowing process, because he couldn't go back to Colombia because of the threat of his life, and yet he couldn't stay in the country. He had family in Canada, and we were able to get him there, which was really meaningful. He just died this last year, unfortunately, but he lived a really wonderful life with his family in Canada, and as a Canadian citizen, it was a really important thing. But yeah. That was hard. I mean, we had roadblocks placed in front of our church. Like, we were very fortunate. We had what most people in Spanish-speaking ministry don't have, which was 12 acres and a church, stone church, English-style church of our own. So we had an ability to gather. We had ability to use a space and to make sure that it felt appropriately shared. But that long road that drove up to the church, they set a roadblock out, the sheriff did. And one of our oldest members, 87 years old, got pulled over. And I remember I was just about to start the service, and I was in my chasuble and my alb and everything like that. And they said, Don Jose is out on 64. Like he just got stopped at the roadblock. So we walked down the road and went out there. And of course, I walked up. I can't imagine what a sight it must have been. But luckily was able to say, he's coming to worship right now, and we're just about to start. Yeah. And the deputy listened and let him go. But it was a hard time. There was a lot of collaboration with that sheriff with a program called 287G, which was a way of kind of having ICE hub and spokes, and that was the hub. Our town was the hub for a lot of spokes. And it was difficult to see how the pattern would be to hold people for 3 days, because ICE would pay for 3 days, but then they would be released at the fourth. So it was like maximizing the amount of
income.
Yeah, it was really tough stuff.
That's tough.
But what I learned was there were partners in the larger community who cared about our common humanity that we could work with, even if we couldn't have agreed on theology or all sorts of other things. that sense of common humanity, we were able to make common cause on that, and some beautiful, beautiful connections arose out of that to this day I still am thankful for, because it helped change the life of people.
Yeah, exactly. I just think of Carlos and being able to help him in such a profound way. I mean, if the church can help people like that, I mean, it's such a profound witness. So we have a tradition here. We take questions from the audience. People write them on little cards. If we get too many, it's almost like a speed round where it's just like we go through them very quickly. But if you have questions, Rebecca will collect them. I wanted to ask you about St. Paul's. Were there times when you were at St. Paul's in Rome where you were in the news media, or that you had to deal with the news media? And then, what are some of just your memories of just working there with the Refugee Center?
Yeah, we got interviewed sometimes by local news when it came to refugee issues, but most of our stories were for Episcopal News Service and things like that, folks who would come and want to talk about the Refugee Center. It was, being at St. Paul's was strange because it's this weird melange of parish rector, like that could be kind of generic rector, except that your next closest colleague is in Florence. Yeah. So in Asheville, where I was, before, you couldn't hardly throw a stone and not hit an Episcopalian, an Episcopal priest. So I had a lot of colleagues that I was used to having support from and being able to reach out to. And it was a lot more kind of frontier-like, yet in the eternal city that is definitely not like the frontier anymore. Yeah. So it was a weird dynamic to wrestle with. But our refugee center was very important. And then we also got in the news for our restoration work on the building. Right,
that's true, exactly.
So, in fact, I was thinking about that today as, we're in Michaelmas here, like in all of the archangels, in the mosaics, the Edward Burne-Jones mosaics at St. Paul's and the apse, there are beautiful representations of all of these different angels. And, one of the things that happened after we were able to clean and restore those and relight those mosaics was you started to see aspects of that really identified them that were showing up from the tessera.
Right, exactly.
So like the moon or the sun, and like just amazing, like the lily, like these beautiful, beautiful symbols that were kind of hidden under dirt and grime.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we have such beautiful art here, and even when you practice yoga, you just see the same images over and over again, and different things sink in at different times. It feels like the saints are talking to us almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you were elected as the bishop in December. I'll just never forget seeing you. I thought you were in Rome when you were talking on the little video, but you were in New York City. It was like, oh my gosh, it's like 3 a.m. or something for you, some late hour. But what is the best piece of advice you've gotten as people have been kind of helping you, like, prepare to be a bishop? What's the best thing? What have kind of things that people been saying about what you should attend to?
A lot of good advice. I think the most important is to love your people. Mm-hmm. Be curious about them and care about their lives, as opposed to thinking that you can do this without them.
Yeah.
So I've really tried to invest pretty heavily on relational work. You know better than anyone. We've got a lot of committee work. We've got a lot of board work. We've got a lot of other things that we have to attend to in this role. But there's an aspect of the relational side of church that if we don't get that part right, we are not going to be able to actually achieve the really big goals that I think Christ is calling us to. So I feel like I've listened to that, and I've tried to put in as much as possible on that front. It's taxing sometimes, it's to try to make sure that everyone is treated as equally as possible and seen as the unique, special child of God that they are. But I think it's worth it. It's worth the time and the investment, because it turns out that's the way you actually move together as as a team.
Yeah, yeah. Up at the Bishop's Ranch, you gave, mostly what happened is that you were listening. So people would talk, and you'd give a very short response, talk, a little short response. But at the very end of our meeting together, you talked about your values. And that's the reason why I brought my notebook, because I wrote down what the values were.
Cool.
But just in case you'd forgotten what your values were.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I got them on my phone, luckily.
Okay, good. Well, when you make a presentation, and there's a presentation for Thursday, like by Sunday, I've moved on. Don't ask me about last week's sermon.
Right.
But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about those values, because I thought that was good, because my handwriting is really small. But authenticity was one of them. Sabbath was another one of them. But yeah, those were helpful, I think, to everybody.
Okay, so here they are. Some of my values that are important to share. A, playing church is no substitute for being church. I love our liturgy. I love our rituals. I think that they have great value for us. But ultimately, I believe that Last Judgment things, we're not judged on whether or not we sense the altar correctly. I think we're judged on whether or not we live this gospel out. And so I want to make sure that as bishop, that we really focus as much attention as possible on getting to that authentic place of worship, connection, of doing the kind of church that actually brings life both to the outside world and to us. Okay, B, it isn't all about us. There's a balance between caring for our interior life as a diocese, a congregation, and as individuals, and being led by God into new relationships with a larger we that God is calling into being.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah. Because,
I've seen that there's when you're hurt and you're traumatized, you have to focus on yourself, right? You have to attend to the things that only you can attend to. However, generally, to be able to move beyond that, you have to have people who are willing to walk with you. And that goes on into larger and larger spheres. And so there's this delicate dance between making sure that you're attending to the things that only you can attend to, that no one can do for you. I think that's the whole, why you can't buy lamp oil, in that parable, right? Yeah. Like you have to make sure that you're attending to your oil. And yet, ultimately, it's not just about that. It's about the we. Yeah. And it's not even about just this we, as important as this we is. It's about the people who are on the bus this morning. It's about the people who aren't going to come into our churches, people who are going to the ball game. It's like, how do you live in a way in which they're included in our we? Yeah. C, observing Sabbath is the only way to remind ourselves that this is God's work that we share and not our work to bear alone. That goes for lay people too. Because sometimes, we can get so involved and so engaged, but we have to figure out ways to make sure we take that breath and remember that this is about what God is doing with us and through us, not just what we're trying to lift alone. Yeah. D, looking for who is not included or welcomed is the surest way of connecting with Christ, even if it is not the path of least resistance. This is where sports paid off as well, right? Because, I said this at the retreat, all of us remember, schoolyard picking teams, right? And in some ways, as many gray hairs or as no hairs that we have, we still sometimes are those kids on the playground with each other, and we have to figure out ways to treat each other and include each other to make sure that childlike self can be brought into maturity. And so I think that part of the great grace of church work is that we profess that is important to us, and so we have an ability to walk into it in a way that others who may not, we have a chance to do that for ourselves. And so I just think that's really important to be always on the lookout for who's not included or welcomed, especially when we're intentionally trying to. Yeah. Last one is, connecting is more valuable over the long haul than combating. We have things that we're really passionate about. we have things that really matter and points of view that we want so badly to share because we want to see the world change along those lines. And yet, to reach that place, we can only do it if we are not fighting one another. We can stand firm in our beliefs and be able to express what we believe, but ultimately, if we're going to change anything, it's about connecting with one another across lines of difference.
Yeah, you could have heard a pin drop when you said that. I mean, it was very effective among the clergy, and especially as the culmination of our time together. Mm-hmm. So I have a few questions from our audience.
Fun.
Evangelism carries some negative baggage. What do you hope we can do to bring the good news to the Bay Area and the world? Great question.
That's a great question. Yeah, evangelism does. So yeah, when I signed up to be a young adult service corps missionary, there's a lot of baggage that comes with the word missionary, right? A lot of bad things done in Christ's name to lots of people around the world. And there have been a lot of amazing things that have happened through faithful missionaries. And so I've always been in the mindset that we need to redeem words rather than toss them out. I refuse to cede the word evangelism to those who express a form of it that I find extremely distasteful and unhelpful. So I think the way that we do it as Episcopalians most comfortably is through personal interaction. It means connecting with friends and trying to just be our authentic selves around them and not being afraid to share with them why we are the way we are. I've experienced multiple times in which I'm in a non-church setting with someone. They're like, "You're like this. You're like, what is it that makes you this way?" And I was like, "Glad you asked." I mean, there's ways to have those conversations when you're invited, as opposed to proselytizing on the street that the world's going to end and everyone's going to hell unless you say this, these particular words in this particular order. I mean, I don't really find that kind of religion very helpful. I think part of what we're seeing in terms of our kind of countrywide shifts when it comes to religious affiliation is that there's a lot of people who don't find that very helpful. But there's a really amazing, beautiful space that the practice of true religion can open up. And that's across denominations, that's across even faith traditions. If we show up and try to live what it means to be a faithful Episcopalian to the deepest of our ability, that turns out that it's the most connective to others who are trying to be the best Buddhists that they can be, who are trying to be, the best Roman Catholics they can be. There's a wide place that I believe the Holy Spirit gathers us if we will attend to that work. And so I would say, do not be afraid of sharing your faith with other people. Do it in ways that are authentic to who you are. If you're a talker, talk. If you're a meal maker, make the meal. If you're a gatherer, gather. I mean, each of us have been given gifts by God to be able to do this work, and it's just discovering those in community and then expressing them as much as you can where the real joy of church is found.
Yeah, that's really true. You've been doing these strategic plan listening sessions. How many have you done so far? And, what are you getting from them? I mean, it must be hard to synthesize all. I mean, we're talking about 15 hours of meetings, right?
Yeah, so we've done, I think 5 now. We've got our Zoom meeting on Thursday. So we'll see. I think that's our last of this particular stage. But then we're going to keep listening throughout these next 13 months as we seek to formulate our strategic vision together. And it's been fascinating because, again, I've come into the system as a relative newcomer. There's things I know about it from the outside that may or may not be true based on people's actual experience. And so getting to hear people express that has been really, really wonderful. There's a fair share of people's sense of hurt and disconnection, and there's a fair share of consolations of we really, really love this thing and we don't want to lose that. And so I think as we move into crafting a vision that feels authentic to all of us and then which we can all kind of claim and move forward with, it's about holding those two things in tension and celebrating the gifts that we've received and kind of doing our best to make sure that we keep those as part of our common life and being willing to be creative about the parts that have maybe not been so great that we want to improve on and can do so with God's help.
Yeah, in response to your pastoral letter, a number of people, I think, at the Cathedral came to me and said, we really appreciate that this isn't just all be happy, like the dark side's not going to be just ignored to this. And, that was my experience too. I thought it was a good balance between, people sharing, hard experiences that they'd had, and then also talking about their hopes for the future.
For sure.
Yeah. So here's another question. Please talk about the hiring of the social justice reverend. How could those of us involved in several causes bring our concerns and requests to the community?
Are you talking specifically about Canon Eric, who is with us right now? Are you talking about the potential?
I would guess that it's about Canon.
Okay.
Eric.
Well, he's right there. There he is. I'm very, very thankful that Eric was our first hire, and I was really, really excited to both draw on his expertise in this diocese and also expertise in the wide field of racial, social, and environmental justice. And so he's been a great addition to our team so far, not only as a good mentor and a friend, but as someone who can navigate the complex world of Bay Area politics and ways to get things done here. So I was thrilled that he said yes to joining our team, and I'm thankful to serve with him.
Yeah, great. Here's another question. We're so glad you're here! Exclamation
Oh,
point.
thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Completely. What is your vision for the diocese, and how may we support you in your vision?
So we're in the midst of this strategic visioning process, and that's going to take 13 more months to get to next year's convention, where we hope to present a pretty fully formed vision that feels authentic to us. What I have said to people at the listening sessions, and what I will say to you, is that I have ideas about where God's calling us, but they're pretty broad, and intentionally so, because I want to make sure that this visioning process is authentic and not just me saying, I have a vision and I'm really just trying to get all of y'all to get on board with my vision. And so I'm going to use I'm going to put some things in place that look like I'm asking for your input, but I don't really mean it. I didn't want anything like that. I wanted it to actually be authentic and real. And so the one thing I've said to everyone is that as long as it leads us to be more connected and effective in our work that we're called to in Christ, that's what I want. That's just the real thing. I want to live real church. As I get older, I realize none of us know how many years that we have, and I just don't want to waste any more time not doing real church, because I believe in what that kind of church can do to change the world for good. I really do. I think that there's hope in that, in a time in which we're facing so many global challenges and so many local challenges, so many personal challenges. But if we actually engage in that work together of being connected and effective, there's no limit to what the Holy Spirit can do through us.
Yeah. As PB-elect Sean Rowe talks to Executive Council and the wider church about plans for restructuring, how will you take his plans into account as you begin your episcopacy with DioCal?
That's a great question.
I know, we got some really good, smart people here.
We do. I'm curious what that working relationship will be like. I've only been in the house for a short amount of time. It's funny, Sean and I are not too different age-wise, but he's been a bishop forever, because he was the youngest bishop elected, I believe, at the time of his election, and I think he still is. So my guess is that there's going to be a lot of focus on our structures, and particularly the ways in which how much is done at the kind of para-church level and how much is done diocesan-wise and local. I don't know yet. I mean, we have I just got a message this past week that we're going to gather for a meeting in December, and I think that's going to be a time after he's invested that we'll get a chance to hear a little bit more about what his particular vision is. But I'm encouraged. I think it's, his election was overwhelming, and so I think that that bodes for a good time which we can work together to see where we're headed.
Yeah, and too, I mean, you're kind of in sync too, so you're both getting a start at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any questions for us at Grace Cathedral, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about, and you've been here for a while now, and like, what are some of the most joyful things about serving in this community that I need to know?
Yeah, I mean, we have this elder mission. So every month we have, 40, 50 plus elders who come to Grace Cathedral, have a morning program, lunch, worship. It's just, that's an amazing, amazing ministry. Nina Pickrell doing Bayview 100 Point, that mission is deeply connected to Grace Cathedral. And we have people there every single Monday. You wouldn't even know it, that's what their practice is, but you go there and they're doing incredible work with people who need it the most. But we have tons of things, the feeding ministries that we have for making dinners for people in the Tenderloin. That group of people, I mean, I swear, first of all, you're in the chapter house and you smell this great smell. And then you go down and you're like with the most joyful people in what they're doing. Education for Ministry, I mean, they're dedicated to advancing theological knowledge. And, every time I'm with them, I would just want to stay with them and just learn from them. But there's so many different things. We have 30 choristers. We thought the choir was going to die out in 2016 because people wanted to go skiing instead of staying in town. But what we found out is that having something that's really demanding and challenging for youth, that adults can understand the importance of a spiritual life and the importance of learning something that's really hard. So we have 30 boys singing in that choir. We have 12 new girls singing in the girls' choir. But I'm meant for everybody, but that's what I was thinking. And we're a little bit less pressed for time than we'd normally be. If either of us were preaching, I'd be like, we got to be up there now.
That's right.
But yeah, those are some of the things I think about. But I mean, we had our we call it Congregation Sundays, like a rally day, like back to church Sunday, end of the summer kind of thing. And we had 27 ministries, tables with 27 ministries represented. And we're still open to new things too. So I'm really grateful. We had 50 children at church last Sunday at the 11 o'clock service.
That's so awesome.
And yeah, it feels like things are growing and developing, and we're meeting some amazing people. And even online, more people are going to watch this online that are in this room, even though it's great to have. But that online ministry is something too, which is just, thousands of people are connecting with Grace Cathedral every month online, and we're trying to figure out what that's going to mean too.
Yeah, I think that's actually, again, COVID gave us a lot of things that we did not want, but it sure did give us some other gifts. And, I think the church realizing that there's a way to reach folks who are not, in our pews already was a really, really good thing. And I mean, I think about overall Grace is such a gift because, the reach is global.
Yeah.
And really we found that at St. Paul's too, because while we didn't have a large crew of people who were in Rome full-time, multi-generationally, we had a committed core, but it was a relatively small number. Our community was so much larger, especially once we were able to share our worship by having that live stream, and what a difference that made to feel connected to people who had been there for 3 years or for 5 years and had been placed in a different diplomatic posting and stuff. I think that Grace's reach is, amazing, and we should use that as best as we can.
Yeah, and fundamentally, I was talking to Susanna Singer, who was here in the
last night?
80s and 90s. Yeah, so she was on staff, and we're talking to Mary Wood this morning too about this. And there's a way in which people at Grace Cathedral deeply understand this ministry of hospitality, this humility of knowing that we're going to have hundreds of tourists every Sunday, and whether you're only going to have one interaction with them, being just an incredible host. So I don't think Cathedral, being part of a cathedral congregation is for everyone, but the people who understand that ministry, they're here, and they really, so those seeds that people planted, Alan Jones and Susanna Singer and Fran Tornquist planted in the 80s and 90s, they're bearing fruit today in terms of how we know how to welcome people.
Boy, isn't that the church though, right? I mean, that was abundantly clear to me at St. Paul's, is the sense that, one plants, another waters, God gives the growth. And I really believe that that's the gift of an institution, if we can embrace it, is that sense of there are generations of faithful people who have contributed to get to where we are today. Our task is to figure out how do we contribute from today's standards so that others in the future will be able to experience the joys that we've
Yeah,
experienced.
that's what I'm so excited about. I think you're gonna know all the people in this room. You're gonna see them at Christmas and Easter and Pentecost and Michaelmas on the street around the cathedral closes. You're coming to pick up your vestments. You're gonna really get to know the people in this room, and I think you're gonna really enjoy it. So I'm looking forward very much to our work together.
Me too, Malcolm. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure thing. I've got a few announcements, and this is like a beautiful note of. Can you read it? You're get better because it's a beautiful note of appreciation for you.
It's
not really a question.
As a bilingual education, cross-cultural education teacher of 50 years, your values are the same as the specialist, credential, and purpose. Muchísimas gracias para servir.
Yeah, so a little note of appreciation. Thank you. Please join me next week when my guest will be Michael Mechanic. We'll be talking about his new book, Jackpot, How the Super Rich Really Live and How Their Wealth Harms Us All. I recommend this conversation. It's very timely for us. You're always welcome to join us upstairs for Choral Eucharist at 11. Today we're celebrating Michaelmas and the seating of the Venerable Miguel Bustos as Archdeacon. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. So THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. And we're so blessed to have you, Austin. Thank you so much for a great conversation. I know we'll all be thinking about these things as we go through this next week.
Thank you, Dean Malcolm. I appreciate it.
Yeah.